You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and we have my wife, Cassandra. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Just living the dream, as I always say. Our listeners are probably like, you say that every week, Steve. We're finally back to getting the podcasts coming out on a Monday.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, we had some jobs going on, and it got delayed by a day several weeks ago, so then I just kept delaying it until this last week. Last week's come out on Monday. But anyhow, so today's topic is something we talk about all the time. This time of year, we don't talk about it all the time, but Christmas trees and toxic mold. So what do you think about when you hear Christmas trees and mold?
Well, first I think about real Christmas trees, not fake plastic things.
Right.
And then I think about watering them.
Exactly. Because we, for our listeners, we go buy a real Christmas tree every year or go cut one down. Just depends.
Yeah, we don't do the cutting one down. I like the Christmas tree farm because they're prettier.
Yeah. Well, in the past, we've done the cutting it down. Kind of like isn't there a movie that they made that's with Chevy Chase?
Really old National Lampoons?
I don't know.
Something like that.
Anyhow, that wasn't our experience. But anyways, for our listeners, the reason I wanted to talk about it is most of our listeners are either going to go buy a real tree or they're going to use a fake tree. And I just want to address mold because a lot of times people it's that time of year. It's the holidays. They don't pay attention. We're coming into the time of year that most people are spending a lot of time in their homes too.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, also, I think lots of people who are traveling to family have mold concerns on their mind about how the place they're traveling to is handling indoor air quality, including having a fresh cut Christmas tree.
Yeah, that's what we talked about last week was traveling and mold. And so this week for our listeners, it's about Christmas trees. And I don't think some of our listeners might get upset by me saying this, but I don't think a Christmas tree is going to cause major mold problems in a home. But on the other hand, we live in a world where we work a lot. It's just we're busy, kids and sports, school, whatever. A Christmas tree could lead to mold concerns. Now, I think if that happens, you've probably got other concerns in the home.
Well, but I also think, sometimes people are wondering, sometimes when there are mold issues, people want to point it to one single thing. But I think it's important to realize that it's cumulative. It's all the things together.
Yep.
And so you never know which is the one thing that will push all the things over the edge.
Yeah, and I think this might come across the wrong way, but if you're careless with your Christmas trees or Christmas tree, you probably are careless with your kids splashing in tubs or cleaning up water after a moisture intrusion event, all sorts of things. So I agree. It's a cumulative thing where over time it just gets worse and worse. But for the Christmas tree, we'll just obviously focus on that, not other people's habits.
Well, but I also think it's important to understand. I mean, sometimes people think they're being really careful by overwatering a Christmas tree. But when you're overwatering a Christmas tree on carpet, so you can't really see where the moisture is going underneath and into the carpet, you might wind up with a mold problem because you're trying to care too much for the Christmas tree.
Yeah. And when you started talking about that, I started thinking to myself, well, like, how would someone prevent that? Because you have the stand, then you have the skirt that goes over the stand, so you can't really see what you're doing. Like, what would you do to prevent that? To me, a simple fix is literally go down to your local hardware store and buy a drip pan for a water heater.
Oh, okay. That's a good idea.
So you'd literally put that drip pan down first, then your tree stand, and then you put the skirt over it. Nobody would see it, is my point.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Because again, you don't want to, if you're overwatering the tree, or if you have little kids that overwater the tree because they just want to help the tree, a drip pan would let you know where the water is going.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure our listeners are like, well, ultimately that could overflow. That's correct. I mean, if you really wanted to get really, really preventive, you could literally buy a drip pan that has, most of them have a connection for a drain pipe. You could literally do that, attach that to it. And I'm not telling our listeners to do that. That's way extreme. But on the other hand, it is just a preventative measure, for, like you said, I think one year we had a puppy, or we thought one of the dogs was going to
eat. Yeah.
And he was. He kept going and bugging it. Now he's not a puppy anymore, so we don't worry about that. But I didn't think about kids. I would assume having kids watching mom or dad water the tree, they're like, oh, I'm going to go water it.
100%. And then you've got an issue before you know it. So I think this is where monitoring, whether it's humidity, monitoring a number of things and building that as a habit, especially around Christmas time, becomes important.
And, we talk about that all the time. So people hear you mention that and they're like, well, what would we do to monitor it?
Well, if you have the drip pan every day, you should be looking to see if there's any water in the drip pan.
But I'm saying like the humidity gauge.
Yeah, I mean... And I don't know. I mean, if you have overwatered a tree for a week before Christmas and the sub carpet or whatever is soaked, would the humidity change in the house?
It would, in my opinion, it would. Yeah.
Okay, so a humidity gauge would be a good way to monitor.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was getting at. Our listeners are probably like, "Well, what would we do?" We talk about preventative measures all the time. Go take that humidity gauge that maybe you have in your office. We have them all over the house.
Yeah, we do.
But temporarily, just go move it and put it, in that living room, family room, wherever you're putting your Christmas tree. Just put the humidity gauge there. Mm-hmm. I mean, once again, depending on our listeners and the style of their home, where we put our Christmas tree, my office is right below it. Mm-hmm. So I would pay attention to the ceiling in my office. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
But we don't have carpet. Like, we don't have a single piece of carpet in the entire home.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good mold prevention strategy in your home.
Yep. And I guess my point is for our listeners, if you have that 4 or 5-year-old or even 14-year-old that wants to help out, wants to water the Christmas tree, just make sure you talk to them about mold, because it brings me back to something you always talk about is habits and education. Educate the people in the home what could go wrong if they overwater the tree.
Yeah. But overall, because I know there are going to be a number of people who hear this and they're thinking, I'm going to my mother's house and I already know she has mold. Should I also be concerned about her Christmas tree? What would you say to that?
Well, if there's mold in the home, her Christmas tree is obviously a concern too. But I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. Like, should they go there or what?
No, I just think sometimes people don't know how to triage what their concerns should be. And I would think in the grand scheme of if you're going to somebody else's house, asking them how they water their Christmas tree is probably on the lowest list of mold questions to be asking them.
Well, and like I said, we talked about it last week, traveling. And, you have to be careful of what you're going to say and how you're going to address these situations, because it will affect your relationship with that person. But the easiest answer is if you were my client and you said, hey, every time we go over to my mom's house, I get headaches, or my teenager comes back with severe asthma attacks, my answer would be, then don't go over there. And as terrible as that sounds, like for me, that's the way you fix that. Mm-hmm. Unless you want to fix the mold problem in your mom's house.
Yeah, no, I think that's just important for people to hear because, sometimes we take certain things to an extreme. You might be like, okay, well, do I know where the Christmas tree came from, what farm it came from, what they sprayed on the tree? We could go down a whole rabbit hole, but I think it's really important that people understand the habits once they get the Christmas tree in their home is probably way more important than who did what while they were growing the tree over the last 50 years.
It brings up a subject of, you go get a new Christmas tree and someone in your house is having negative health effects. Is it mold? No, not always. They could have an allergy to the tree or, like you said, the pollens or the stuff they spray. That was something I wanted to bring up is, I know when we go buy our Christmas tree, they ask us, do you want us to spray it? And it's I don't know if it's DuPont, but it's like a sealant, I think. If that's what I'm talking about, that supposedly it helps that you don't have to water the tree as much. I'm sure there are Christmas tree farms where you can actually get, I don't even know what our listeners are probably like, what are you talking about, Steve? But it's sparkly stuff looking I'm not sure what it's even called. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like
the tree's already pre-painted, sprayed?
Yes.
Okay, yes. But you have no idea what they did to the tree, so worrying about that, I guess, is my point.
Exactly.
It's kind of a moot point.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is to our listeners, it might not be a good idea to have, that tree sprayed because of the VOCs that are in it.
Yep. And VOCs are what, for those who don't know?
Volatile organic compounds.
Like perfumes, candles that smell really nice.
We've done episodes about it, but my definition of VOCs is probably a little different than the true definition. But I've even heard recently MVOCs.
Okay.
Mold volatile organic compounds, which as a professional, I'm not really sure what that is. I think it's just a term that people are making up. But for our listeners, the VOCs could be perfumes, chemicals, paints, air fresheners, all the stuff we're introducing to our homes. And although it might help make the tree last longer or you have to water it less, you just don't know what chemicals are in that.
Yeah, so, we avoid that.
Yeah, we don't do it. And I guess that's my point to our listeners is, I wouldn't have them add something that you're not really sure what's in it. And if you ask them, they're probably going to tell you what you want to hear.
Absolutely.
Be like, it's all EPA registered stuff. And speaking of VOCs and stuff like that, I did want to address a little bit of the fake trees. If you're buying an artificial tree, same concerns you could have.
Well, and fake trees are plastic, aren't they?
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah, and we have enough plastic in our bodies as it is. Do we want to introduce more plastic? I'm just not a fan of fake trees.
Yeah. And I'm sure some of our listeners, I know growing up, my mom had artificial trees.
So did my mom.
So, that's just how I grew up. But, for our listeners that have artificial trees, where are you storing those the rest of the year?
Yeah.
Is it out in your shed that's leaking, that has a mold problem? Is it down in your basement storage room that's not finished? And every time in the spring it floods, you don't really care? So there are concerns too with artificial trees.
Oh, absolutely.
And whether it's VOCs or mold or, anything, there can be problems. It brings me back to what you said. The habits of people over time could lead to health concerns or indoor air quality concerns.
Absolutely. So what's your call to action for people?
We talked about going and cutting down your own tree, but make sure you don't go cut down a tree that's full of bugs and stuff that you're not sure what you're introducing to your home. Because once again, mold is naturally present. Once you bring in a foreign object that's obviously alive or was alive, the tree, you could be bringing in other contaminants into the home.
Absolutely.
And we do, for our listeners, we do VPAs, which is a virtual property assessment. We offer tons of services on our website, but a VPA is pretty helpful, I think is probably the word I want to use. Most common thing I get from potential clients is, how do you do a VPA if, you're in Wyoming or Utah and I'm in Illinois? You'd be surprised.
Absolutely.
How many problems that we find and visible mold and everything with a VPA. But it's a pretty thorough inspection with me guiding you around your house. There's a list of tools that I think you should have: flashlight, ladder, stuff like that. But anyhow, for our listeners, we offer those things and plenty of other things on our website. So go to cnccontractorservices.com. I'll put a link in the podcast description. So you got anything else you want to say?
No, but make sure you sign up for either Mold Consult or VPA because it could save you a lot of time and money.
Exactly. And I think we're past Black Friday, so we'll probably have some sort of specials we're doing.
Yeah,
over
some
the
New
holidays.
Year's,
Yeah,
Christmas
something.
special.
But okay, for all of our listeners, we appreciate all of you. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.